Hello, everyone. Welcome to the lecture on data ownership. So we're going to talk about who actually owns your data, why some people think you should be able to get paid for your data, and then some current debates on AI and the actual data training AI models. So let's go. So just an introduction relating back to cloud. Cloud computing enables remote data storage and management. So remember, cloud companies store pretty much all of our data. DDD, that's data. There's so much data going into these cloud, basically infrastructure, and millions and millions and billions and amounts of data every day go into this, and the cloud computing companies manage that. Um, Relating back to AI, AI is shaping data ownership rights. So there's different sides to different arguments around owning your data, training the data, being able to opt in or opt out of AI companies actually training your data. So we'll chat about that as well. So this lecture focuses on the concept of data ownership in general, and then I'll talk about and answer some questions about different debates over AI and data ownership. So what is data ownership? Data ownership refers to the rights, so you all have rights and responsibilities of individuals, organizations, or entities over the data they actually create, collect, store, and manage. So if you think about you as an individual, you own different things, right? You own your computer, you own your clothes, you own your shoes, you own whatever, your car, maybe. So if you think about ownership in general, ownership's definition is really the ability to possess, use, gift, pass on, destroy, trade, and or sell your stuff. And if you apply that to data, so your ability to actually possess your data yourself, use your data, give your data to someone else, pass on your data, destroy your own data, trade your data with someone else, and or sell your data. So you know, if you actually own your data, you have the ability to really access it, create more data, modify it, package it. You can derive benefit from it in terms of selling it or another way, actually sell it or even delete it, as well as the right to assign these privileges to other people. Um, and currently, we can't really do that with companies. And if you can, it takes a lot of work, and people don't really know that they have these rights. Um, so I'm going to talk the next thing I would do in class is I show this video um, by Jennifer Zhu Scott, who argues that we should get paid for our data. So she basically argues that we create all this data, like I said, data, 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 data. The user creates all this data, and you give all this data to these big companies like Amazon and Microsoft and Google and whoever. And Google, for example, makes billions of dollars, and Amazon Web Services is, projected to be worth trillions of dollars in the future, uh, B and T, and we don't really get paid for that, and she argues that we really should. And she takes kind of an economic perspective that says, we're creating this data anyway, we're giving it to these companies anyway. It could only really help people, for example, she argues, get out of poverty. It would actually be good for the economy in terms of spending if we actually got paid for these companies using our data. So in class, in person, what I would do is show this video right now. So if you want to pause this video and watch the TED Talk, it's a TED Talk, so about 15 minutes or so. Go ahead and do that. If not, continue on with the lecture and then watch it later. But I think it would make more sense to watch now so you'll have the context. But that's up to you. So a good example of why this matters is ChatGPT, which I'll talk about in a second. So for example, OpenAI has been accused of stealing a lot of the data that's been posted to the internet. So for example, YouTube, they're basically taking a lot of the content from the YouTube creators and training their models with that data. They're also taking a lot of design, like graphic designers. They make, pictures and art, and everything, and they're kind of stealing this off the internet to train their models. And we're not getting paid for that. Sometimes you're not even getting recognized for that. So, there's a big kind of controversy over, do we actually own our data? Who owns our data? What rights do we really have about owning our data? And so on. So again, data ownership and AI. Um, there's been a big New York Times investigation that I gave you a link to in Canvas that finds a lot of tech companies use our data, and a lot of creators, so a lot of YouTube creators, as I talk about, to actually train the AI models. Um, I just mentioned this. OpenAI basically stole a lot of YouTube training data or YouTube actual creator data and trained, ChatGPT on the transcripts of that because ChatGPT needs text to understand text, right? Remember the training data and the input output. So for natural language processing, you have the training data that goes in, and then eventually you get your output. But it needs to be able to learn on this training data, and it needs lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of training data. So I encourage you to listen to that New York Times investigation. It's really interesting. It's called AI's Original Sin, and it's not just OpenAI. It's also Google and other companies basically, doing what they want with our data, and we're not really getting anything from it. So, this is kind of a current debate going on of what power do we really have. So a lot of individuals and companies are mad about this. The New York Times is suing OpenAI and Microsoft over AI use of copyrighted work. And I also could encourage you to watch this video about art. It's a news story about art created with AI, and it talks a lot about the data ownership and do the creators of this art, you know, is it really stealing their stuff? Is it creating something new? Which I'll go over in a second when we talk about the debates. So in terms of the debates over AI and data ownership, so there are different kind of core questions that people are asking these companies because all this stuff is new, it's all continuously evolving, that type of thing. So one of the question is who owns the data used to train AI? That relates back to the ownership concept, what Jennifer Zhu Scott talked about in her TED Talk. Should AI companies pay for using copyrighted data? So, if your data is actually copyrighted, should they actually pay you or should they have access uh, or not? Should users have the right to opt out of AI training? So, kind of, we're in a default opt in model right now where we really don't know what's going on. So, should we actually have the right to opt out? Who is actually responsible for AI generated content? So are the companies that actually, if you're typing in a prompt to ChatGPT, are you responsible for creating that content? Are the companies responsible? That type of thing. And should AI training be actually regulated? So I'll go over the key points related to these 5 questions now. So who owns the data? Who actually owns the data used to train AI? So there's arguments for arguments for the individual, and there's arguments for the corporation. So these are kind of the different points. So users, you actually generate the data. You generate your social media posts. You generate your Google searches. You generate whatever text messages you send, and you should retain control over it, right? The user generates everything, so we should have control. Um, the arguments here also is we should have consent. We should actually say yes before AI companies use our personal data to really train their models. Right now, we're not really being asked to consent to any of this. They're just kind of doing it in the background. And then some people like Jennifer Zuscott and perhaps you argue that we should have compensation. Um, if they're making money, why shouldn't we, the user, be making money? So in this argument, really the user is in control, you're in control of your data, and you would get paid. The arguments for the corporation basically is that user data, a lot of it is public once shared online. So for example, if you share your stuff on social media or on YouTube, that it's a part of the public domain and they can kind of do with what they want. Even though YouTube is against taking YouTube data is against Google's policy, actually, which you'll hear about in the podcast. But of course, Google actually did that anyway, so they're violating their own policy. There's also something called fair use. Um, so, if it's accessible to the public, um, then people can basically do what they want with it. It's freely available on the internet, and that's kind of this fair use doctrine. So anyone can use it in how they want to use it. And then a big argument here, and you'll hear this often with tech companies, and I'm sure you'll hear this in the future too, because this has been going on for hundreds of years, not with software technology, but a lot of industrial revolution technology that upended the world. It's really the innovation argument. So innovation depends on access to these data sets, and restricting data could slow the progress of AI or slow the progress of whatever technology. So a lot of the companies are kind of arguing that innovation is key. We need to be able to compete with other countries, um, and our models should be the best. And to properly innovate, we should be allowed to do what we want with user data. So innovation is the ultimate goal here, and if we don't have access to this data for free, um, then we will fall behind. Second question here is, should AI companies pay for using copyrighted data? So there's arguments for payment and there's arguments against payment. So again, AI models are trained on things like news articles, books, images, and the creators of these things argue that they should be paid for this, right? So for example, I publish academic articles. I don't get payment from those at all, but people write books, people create images, as you'll see in that video. People write articles. New York Times kind of owns that as well. So should the creators of those actually get paid? They created the content, so basically, if you use that content to train your model, the argument here is the creator should get paid. The AI models, furthering the argument, is they compete with human creators. So ChatGPT, for example, could actually replace a lot of copywriters writing news articles, writing scripts for movies. There's a big um, kind of union shutdown in Hollywood a couple of years ago or last year, I can't remember. But one of the fears was that AI would basically write a lot of the movie scripts and the writers would not get, fairly compensated or they would be fired. Um, so fair compensation would be necessary here because the argument here is that basically these things are being trained to eliminate jobs. Um, Some governments are pushing for licensing agreements to ensure AI firms pay their content creators. So OpenAI has had a deal with the Associated Press where they actually pay some money. You could actually, for example, submit your work to ChatGPT or to OpenAI and actually get compensated for that. Again, these things are really new, so these models haven't played out yet. Arguments against payment, so companies should be able to do whatever they want. Um, The arguments is basically they're using public data just like a human would read a book. So, if you're reading something online or reading a book, the training model is suggesting basically that, the software is just reading anyway, just like you would read an article. Um, so it's not really taking the content, it's just reading it, right? It's not saying it's ours, it's saying we're just looking at it and digesting it just like a human would a book. Um, so requiring payments could create monopolies where only the biggest AI firms can afford to train models. That's one of their arguments as well. And then there's also this one argument called the transformative use argument. So the companies argue that AI doesn't really copy content. It takes the content but doesn't like plagiarize it. It doesn't reproduce it. It's actually creating something new out of it. So there's kind of this rule where you say, okay, if I use your content, then you should be acknowledged or paid somehow, basically. But, for example, OpenAI has argued that they're really just using it to create something new, just like a musician would use past songs to create new songs, and the songwriters, it's just kind of inspiration basically for newly generated content. You're not reproducing it, you're just using it to uh, kind of inform your creativity, basically. And they're arguing that that's what AI is actually doing. So should users have the right to opt out? So there's arguments for and arguments against. So opting out means you can click something that says you don't want your data um, to be trained, basically, to have companies have access to this to train AI models. So the arguments should be basically you have more control. You should be able to delete or prevent AI companies from actually using your data. Um, there's arguments that these actually violate a lot of privacy laws. And then there's a lot of protests going on that these companies are using their work without consent, like the artists and writers and producers on YouTube, that type of thing. So against opting out is kind of the same general arguments where AI needs a lot of data and opt-outs could reduce the effectiveness of the model. So again, it's kind of the innovation argument where, this is the latest and greatest tool that will save humanity and will be, and not having access to this will lower, our basically we won't be as innovative as other countries will be, and therefore we'll lose out the race to the most effective AI, and we won't be able to have the most effective technology going forward. Um, Another argument basically is the same. Content online is freely available, and limiting access again could stifle innovation. So innovation is key here. That's one of the arguments. And then some argue that the terms of service already give consent for data use, but a lot of advocates say, these terms of service agreements are really vague on purpose. They're long on purpose, that no one actually reads them, that type of thing. So who is actually responsible here for AI generated content? So actually generating the content, for example, using something like ChatGPT or using an AI tool. So who should be held responsible for that content that's been generated? So there's arguments for holding the actual AI developers accountable and basically holding the individual um, accountable. So if you create something like harmful, biased, or misleading, so we talked a lot about bias in a few weeks ago. Um, should you be held accountable for that, or should OpenAI be held accountable for that? And the companies argue, or the argument for holding developers accountable is they're the ones creating the model. But the developers say, well, they're not the ones creating the content. If AI uses copyrighted data, its output should be legally tied to the original creators. So again, the actual developers, creating something like misinformation, um, if someone uses it for misinformation or for a deep fake or something like that, the original creator should be held accountable here because they're allowing that to happen. Of course, the argument against that is basically the user did it, we didn't do it. We just supplied the tools, and people can do whatever they want with the tools. And then, this goes again, misinformation like deepfakes needs regulation here. So, is the technology really neutral, or who's really accountable for potentially harmful content? And then against liability, so the responsibility falls on users. And then, like I said before, tech companies basically provide this as a tool, like a camera or a spreadsheet or something. And the people that use it should be held accountable, not the actual companies. And then the last one is regulation. So should AI training actually be regulated? So a lot of arguments for regulation and against. The main argument against is limiting innovation, and it's a barrier for smaller companies to really get into the game. Um, they're hard to enforce. So who's actually going to audit these companies and enforce a lot of these regulations? And then the industry moves fast, so the laws actually might become outdated. The arguments for is basically, relates back to the data ethics standards. So the for would basically covering like what AI companies can actually use and licensing agreements with content creators. There's really nothing, legal about what they can do. There's a lot of, moral or not moral, ethical debates here of what they're doing. Is it ethically sound or not? But there's not really any laws against what's going on. So actually defining these laws of what AI companies can use, what data they have access to, that type of thing. Also, laws about transparency and what they're actually using the data for. This then goes back to data ethics as well. If companies were more transparent, then we would know what's going on. And also privacy protections. So, you know, a lot of companies are actually using our data, and there's a potential for them to exploit certain populations, basically. Depending on what the actual data they're using is, it might be data that you don't want anyone to see. So conclusion, uh, innovation is a tricky thing. If you slap on a ton of regulations, the argument against, innovation is limited, basically. If you don't, then, you know, these companies can really essentially do whatever they want, and the users don't have a lot of rights. So finding that balance is really key. So individuals, I think, want more control over their data. Um, AI companies are seeking basically unrestricted access to improve these models. So they want to be able to do whatever they want. They really don't want the government to regulate them at all. Um, you know, Before at least the new Trump administration, the governments were really considering a lot of Congress was considering new laws to regulate. There was even like um, an AI Bill of Rights, kind of similar to the GDPR for America, and that's since kind of been erased, basically. So the debate will continue. Remember, we're at the beginning of this stuff, so watch carefully to see what's going to happen. Um, the legal system takes time, and a lot of these cases will start to, see the light and get their day in court. So we'll actually see what happens. Will the AI companies kind of get away with taking a lot of our data without informing us, or will they not? So what I want you to do for the discussion, in addition to the healthcare case, um, choose a couple of these questions and answer them. So, do you think you should be able to, you know, legally be able to possess, use, gift, pass on, destroy, trade, or sell your data? So basically, should you own your data? Do you think you should get paid for your data? And then these are the questions about the AI debates, basically. Who do you think owns the data? Should companies pay for using the data? Should users have the right to opt out? Should companies be held accountable for AI generated content if it's harmful? And what are your thoughts on regulation? So you don't have to answer all of these, just pick a couple and talk about them in addition to the part one. So thank you.